Day 7 of the 2024 U.S. Championships saw the reigning U.S. Women's Champion, Carissa, win yet again, as she's now started off with an incredible 7 straight victories in this year's event. Jumping into the Open results, tournament leader Fabiano Caruana was held to a draw today by Sam Sevian. Meanwhile, wins were scored by Awonder Liang over Grigoriy Oparin and Robson over Hans Niemann. Caruana continues to lead with 4.5 out of 7, with Awonder in clear second place with 4 points. In the U.S. Women's Championship, Carissa scored yet another win, this time defeating the 2-time champion Paikidze with the white pieces. Carissa is still 2 points ahead of Begim Tokhirjonova, who today defeated Rose Atwell and currently sits on 5 out of 7. Going into the games, we'll start with the game between Sevian and Caruana, which featured a Nimzo-Indian defense. Sevian went for the e3 and bishop d2 variation, which is pretty topical these days. But Caruana responded solidly: d5, bishop back to e7, knight f3, knight d7, and eventually Sevian takes on d5, and we get this Carlsbad structure in the position. So rook e8, bishop d6 from black, rook e1, knight f8, and here white plays e4. Which is definitely an interesting possibility. Drawback, of course, is that white leaves himself with a weakness on d4, but on the other hand, he opens the diagonal and gets some active play towards black's king. But knight takes e4, bishop takes e4 happened, bishop to e6. Caruana playing very, very solidly here. Knight to g5, g6, and white can take on e6, but after knight takes e6, there's not much there for white. Black is very solid, and the d-pawn is a big weakness. So h4, Sevian goes for the kingside attack, but now bishop to e7, pretty crafty move by Caruana, as he's preventing h5 as the knight on g5 is then going to hang. Here, Sevian spends a long time and ends up taking on e6, and the reason he spent a long time here is because he was calculating knight takes e6, and now bishop takes g6. And the point here is after hg, he's going to sacrifice the rook on e6, with the bigger point that if black takes this rook, white gets queen takes g6, and here white actually doesn't have more than a perpetual. So essentially this is a combination to force a draw. And white can even take on e6 here. Black goes back with king h8, and yeah, white's just not in time to do anything here. Despite black's king being so open, black just needs one move to play bishop f6 and defend, and then of course black could be a rook up. So basically white is just not in time to do anything except give a perpetual check. In the game, Caruana actually takes on h4, which is also totally fine for black, as he gets the pawn back. And now white could trade on e8, but then queen takes e8, and yeah, d-pawn is still around. So instead, Sevian takes on g6. This time, black definitely has to take the rook, and after takes, queen takes. The player is repeated here after king h8, queen h6. Neither side has anything better than to make a repetition. If black tries to run with king f8, then he is basically just losing here after bishop h6, followed by the rook coming into e1, and yeah, black's king is just going to get hunted down. So a draw here is basically forced, and yeah, after they repeated, a draw was then agreed. So moving on to the game between Oparin and Awonder Liang. This game very well played by Awonder. He had a big time advantage already at this point, and he's up a pawn, so he's doing quite well already in this position. But the final attack here was quite nice. So playing black, he goes knight to g6, hitting the bishop on f4. Bishop drops back. Now the rook swings into a3. White played knight f3, and now queen to a5, looking for rook a2 ideas. White goes knight d2, and now knight h4. Black now hits the king side. So Awonder really played this part of the game fantastic. As Oparin tries to defend here, knight to b3. Queen swings over to h5. Now black's pieces are really getting very close to white's king, and it feels like a sacrifice is imminent. So bishop d1, queen g6, king h2. Now knight to e5, the last piece gets into the game. Knight c1, and here come the fireworks. So rook takes d3. Very, very nice shot from Awonder. If knight takes d3, then knight takes, and black is going to be winning back all the material as white's queen and rook are both going to be hit there. So queen f2 was tried by Oparin, but now queen takes e4, and yeah, black is just grabbing a ton of material and just getting closer and closer to white's king. So bishop g5 was tried, opening up an attack against the queen, also hitting the knight on h4, but now very, very nice follow-up. Rook takes h3 check, If white were to take this rook, then black has knight f3 check. White can take this one. The second knight comes to f3 with check, and then black is winning the rook on e1, and it's just going to be up a bunch of pawns. So after rook takes h3, king g1 was tried, and now Awonder takes on g2, and this is just a nice combo to simplify things. White has to take, black takes the queen, king takes g2, and after h takes g5, black is getting the piece back and is now up 5 full pawns here. So c5 was the last try, looking to undermine the knight on e5, but rook c3 ended the game as black now has threats of hitting the knight, taking the last pawn as well, and white is just too slow to do anything. So very nice win by Awonder, which now puts him in clear second place in the tournament. Also scoring a nice win was Ray Robson, who in this position was way down on the clock against Hans Niemann in a pretty equal situation. This came out of a Berlin defense. But here Ray decides to go for it with the move c5, temporarily sacrificing the pawn after b takes c5. His idea is to play queen to c2 and try to win this pawn back under better circumstances where black's remaining pawns will be very weak. And at this point, black's position is still pretty solid. For example, he can trade on d1 and go rook to b8 with nice counterplay against the b pawn. He can also play rook to d5, I believe. And in general, black should be all right here. But Hans decides to play c4, giving the pawn back. B takes c4, and now king to f7. So bishop to e1. Ray looking to improve the bishop, also eyeing the a5 pawn. So on rook takes d8, it's hard for black to recapture with the rook. Hans goes bishop to c5, but now bishop to h4. And all of a sudden, white's bishop here gets very active. Here comes rook to b8, but now rook to d3. And Robson, although he's in heavy time trouble, starts finding some very, very active moves as white's second rook is coming to d1. And now he has this very nasty idea of rook to d7 check, just infiltrating on the 7th rank. And white's bishop is doing a very important job of cutting black from being able to challenge for the d-file. So Hans tries rook to b4 with counterplay, but now rook to d1, rook takes c4. White could give check here, but he starts with queen b3 instead, also very possible, pinning the rook to the queen. Now if the rook moves, there's going to be rook to d7 check, and black will be losing a ton of material. So black's king at this point is in huge danger. Hans goes rook to e8, but now rook d7 check, king g8, and bishop f6. Very, very strong move, setting up ideas of rook to g7 check, followed by bringing the second rook to the 7th rank, which is then going to be very, very dangerous for black's king. Let's say the king goes to f8, then one rook goes to h7 and threatens rook h8 with huge mating threats. The other threat is queen to g3 in this position, where black doesn't actually have a good way of defending the g6 pawn, and white's queen just invades with checkmate. So here Hans played rook takes f4, but this just walks into queen g3, which Robson found, and Hans was forced to resign as the rook is hanging, and g6 is threatened as well with imminent mate to come. So very, very nice win by Ray. He gets back to an even score and is still within striking distance of the leader, Caruana. Jumping to the U.S. Women's Championship today, of course, the key game was between Carissa and Nazi Paikidze. And this one started off as an advanced Caro-Kann with h4. Queen to b6 was played by black, h5, h6. And here Carissa plays the move c3 and bishop to d3. Definitely doesn't seem like the most challenging setup to this variation. Black trades the light squared bishops, queen a6. White avoids the trade with queen to e3, knight d7. And definitely feels like black actually got a pretty reasonable version of like a French or Caro type position. However, the game gets very, very complicated after knight f5, queen f3, black trades on d4, goes rook to c8, here white goes g4, and at this point Paikidze decides to sacrifice the piece with knight takes d4. Definitely a very, very interesting sacrifice. Black gets the second pawn, knight takes e5, and then gets the knight in with knight to d3 check. It wasn't totally necessary. Black could have actually dropped back with the knight to e7, then bring this knight to c6, and would still have a reasonable game. But after knight takes d4, things get very, very complicated. Knight takes, knight e5, queen e2, knight d3, king d1. This is all forced. And now black plays bishop to c5. Here Carissa finds basically only move to survive because the knight is under attack, and then knight takes f2 check is in the air as well. So white's knight can't move without white losing a ton of material. And if you play knight to b3, for example, then black has bishop d4, knight d4, and queen a4 check. winning back the piece with a completely winning position. Actually, black doesn't win back the piece right away because there's knight c2, but then there's rook takes c2, which is a huge point. Queen takes c2, knight takes f2 check. Then black will trade queens, then take the rook on h1, and have a bunch of extra pawns. Instead, though, Carissa finds fantastic resource rook h3, counterattacking the knight on d3. And now if bishop takes d4, white can play rook takes d3 and has a piece for 2 pawns. And it's not the easiest position, but white is definitely better here. So instead, the game saw queen a4 check, knight to b3. And at this point, the best for black was to take on d4. White would go rook takes d3. Now, for example, bishop to f6. Engine says white is better, finds this idea with f4, followed by g5, which is pretty difficult to meet. But of course, position would still be very, very complicated, and the edge for white is not that big. However, instead, black goes for knight takes f2, sacrificing a second piece with the idea of queen takes f2, e5. But here, Carissa just completely refutes this combo off the board. Queen f5, very, very nice start, hitting the rook on c8. Black castles. Now, white could take this pawn, then after rook e8, black would definitely have some activity. Instead, Carissa just goes back, knight c2, and now has 2 extra pieces. And black certainly has a lot of play in the center, but after d4, g5, it turns out is just too slow. White's attack on the king side is much faster, and black's counterplay is not in time, as white wants g takes h6, rook to g3, or h takes g7, and yeah, black's king is just getting opened up here. So black tried d3, but now white can take e4, rook to c3, rook d8, bishop to d2, and white just has too much extra material here around the king, and black basically tried everything here to open things up, but it wasn't enough. Bishop d4, queen g4, nice move from Carissa, pinning along the 4th rank. Now f5, knight takes f5, rook takes f5, queen takes, bishop takes c3, queen e6 check, another precise move from Carissa, defending the knight before recapturing the bishop on c3. And once again, white is 2 pieces up, and black is just kind of out of attackers here. White's king is too safe. So game finished here after hg, king c2, check, king b2, rook d8, h6. And here black resigned as g takes h6 is met with queen f6 check, picking up the rook, and it's all over. So another fantastic win by Carissa as she moves to a perfect 7 out of 7 score and gets much closer to that bonus Fisher prize of $64,000 to any player that gets a perfect 11 out of 11 score. So she's got 4 more wins to go. At this point, it seems very, very possible that she can do it. And yeah, we'll see what happens in the final rounds. So that brings us into tomorrow's round 8. We've got Caruana black against Wesley So huge game in the open section. And Carissa Yip will be black against Atusa Porkashian. So another huge game there as Carissa continues her campaign for the perfect 11 out of 11. Should be a very, very interesting round. Hopefully I'll see you back here for the recap. Until then, take care.